Petersburg, Sarasota.
Coming up next, Duke Energy scuttles plans for that new $25 billion nuclear plant in Levy County, leaving customers on the hook for more than $1 billion. The St. Pete mayoral primary is just a few weeks away, and the candidates held their first televised debate this week. High interest in what to do about Hillsborough County's crowded roads, and a top consumer advocate is leaving the state legislature. Political Insights next on Florida This Week.
From the WEDU studios, this is Florida This Week. And now, moderator Rob Lorai.
Welcome back. This week our guests are Sharon Calvert is the co-founder and president of the Tampa Tea Party and a Republican. Nadine Smith is executive director of Equality Florida and a Democrat. Wayne Garcia is a professor of journalism at the University of South Florida in Tampa. And Mitch Perry is news and politics editor at Creative Loafing. Hey, thanks for coming. It's great to see you. Well, Duke Energy announced last week it was scuttling plans to build a $25 billion nuclear plant in Levy County, just north of the Tampa Bay area. Duke customers have already paid nearly $1.5 billion for the canceled plant under a law passed by the state legislature. On top of the $1.5 billion, the Florida Public Service Commission this week okayed a rate increase for customers to pay more for the company's now closed Crystal River nuclear power plant. That plant has not generated any electricity since 2009. The rate increase will last at least 7 years. St. Petersburg State Representative Dwight Dudley blasted the PSC decision, saying the ratepayers of Florida will now be on the hook for $3.2 billion, and in return, customers got an empty construction site in Levy County and a useless hunk of radioactive concrete at Crystal River. He went on to say utility shareholders, on the other hand, will receive millions in profit. Wayne, is there any way the customers can get their money back? They paid this $1.5 billion advanced nuclear cost recovery fee. Can they get any of that back?
They need to install some solar panels, I guess, and try to get off the grid. Maybe that's the only way. Look, no, there's no way. We've been through about 10 to 15 years of systematically sort of pulling away protections for consumers, especially in the areas that the PSC covers. And if it hasn't been done legislatively, it's been done by inaction by the PSC. And if it hasn't been done that way, it's been done in terms of Rick Scott getting people who would ask tough questions. I'm thinking of Nancy Argenziano off of the PSC and putting on people who maybe won't be so tough on the utilities. You know, the problem with this issue is, aside from one newspaper's front pages, there isn't a lot of outrage. And the reason is because, okay, I live in Tampa, I don't pay those rates. And so the rest of the state is like, well, that's the problem with those people in Pinellas County and wherever.
Citrus County and
yeah,
Pasco County.
And it's going to be really hard to sort of build a political momentum and outrage until it starts tripping over into all those other power companies, which it will.
Well, you know, Dwight Dudley, as you mentioned in your intro, he certainly used this as a campaign issue last fall, and it did help him, I think, and it became a resident issue in Pinellas County, where our Progress Energy / Duke Energy customers now. Michelle Railwinkle-Vasalinda has been trying this bill to repeal the Advanced Nuclear Cost Recovery, as they call it, passed in 2006. She has gotten nowhere. I think that she'll get some, maybe some push, some momentum next spring. Will it be enough, though, to turn this around? Because as Wayne says, there's not really a lot of outrage. There's outrage when this came in the paper last Friday, for sure, but then it kind of dissipates like a lot of issues in Tallahassee.
Will this be a litmus test for those elected state officials who are running for re-election in Pinellas and in Pasco County and Citrus and Hernando and Levy all the way up the coast?
Well, it should be, and it's up to the voters to make it that, right? And that's what Dudley did last spring and again, last fall. And we'll see what happens. But, it's also a bigger question about nuclear power overall, that was big in the 70s and kind of went away. And there was a resurgence 5 years ago or so, right? That because of climate change, this is a clean energy and this was, something that we could, help us out here. And it really hasn't happened, not just here in Florida, but in other parts of the country. There was a lot of hype that it was going to happen. It hasn't happened.
Well, and then you look at what's happening in Japan right now, where they're finally admitting to the seriousness of the situation. But I wonder if this isn't one of those class action lawsuits that'll be turned into a crowd-stirring movie one day about the little people fighting back against these sort of monolith, people with a license to steal.
Well, again, it was a legislative act in 2006 that allowed this to do this. And again, that just goes to show you that the government never has enough information when they're making some of these policy decisions, because like what you mentioned, nuclear power may have been thought to be revived at one time, but technology moved on, and so what we have now with natural gas boom and some of the other technologies and the delays in getting the federal licenses, help create this problem.
And Sharon, some people say the utility donations to elected politicians, elected officials in Tallahassee were the reasons why the PSC had its teeth removed. It's no longer as I think, could we say, objective as it used to be maybe 15 years ago. Do you think political campaign contributions made that happen, or why do you think that happened?
Well, I mean, I really can't answer this question unless I looked at it, right? But I do believe that, again, I think it just goes to show you that these policy decisions that are made, especially in a heavily regulated industry like energy, the unintended consequences is what we see. But also the settlement with them not building the Levy County nuclear plant, they're guaranteed 9.5% profit margin until 2018. So perhaps that profit margin could be cut and return, whether it's a lower rate or some type of return of some of that money to their customers.
It's interesting that Charlie Crist was governor when this law was put into effect. Does it hurt Charlie Crist that he was the governor and he signed off on this?
If Rick Scott wants to make that issue next year.
But Rick Scott isn't clean on this either.
It's Tallahassee. I mean, it's bipartisan. I mean, Mike Fasano over last year said he wished he had voted differently. But Sharon's right. I mean, I heard this about Stand Your Ground too. These lawmakers vote for this, and 8 years later, why didn't we know what I was doing?
They obviously thought at that time the plant was going to come up and run and make energy, and everyone would be happy. It didn't work out.
But it was always controversial, the idea of still paying for something that you didn't have in front of you yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, you're picking the winners and losers by allowing the plants to do that.
Well, and to be honest, I mean, there are a lot of lawmakers who don't read what's put in front of them. They rely on lobbyists to explain the bill for them. And term limits has made that even more true, that there's a lot of people that rely on lobbyists to tell them what something really does, as opposed to read it for themselves and raise questions. And I think that's part of the culture that produces these kinds of laws.
All right. Well, the three major candidates for St. Petersburg mayor held their first televised debate this week. There are less than 3 weeks left in the contest, and incumbent Mayor Bill Foster is facing a challenge from two former city council members, Kathleen Ford and Rick Kreisman. The challengers criticized Foster's handling of the pier, his stance on negotiating with the Rays baseball team, allegations of deteriorating neighborhoods, and businesses pulling out of Midtown. Meantime, in a break with past positions, the mayor said this week he's willing to let the Tampa Bay Rays look at potential stadium sites in Hillsborough County. So, Nadine, does the mayor's race boil down to the pier, baseball, neighborhoods, and development in Midtown?
Unfortunately, it may just boil down to that. I think that, one of the things about St. Pete, not to sound like a total booster, but it is a real gem with so much potential. And I think that what you see here is a divide between a lot of people who've invested in developing the downtown region, the waterfront, those areas, seeing opposition to the lens as a step backwards rather than a bold step forward that really will lift St. Petersburg up, versus folks who see it as a financial, boondoggle on top of a boondoggle. I think one of the challenges is who's going to step forward and be a visionary leader out of these three mayoral candidates, and to the degree that it becomes who can avoid the issue, who can avoid getting hurt the most by any one of these individual issues. It's a bit dispiriting, but I think that in some ways the people who are now sort of galvanizing around those issues are the ones who are sort of driving St. Petersburg more than this election will in the end.
Are people fired up? Is there going to be a big turnout, do you think, in St. Pete for the primary at the end of August?
I don't know that I'd say people are fired up, but I think that the camps are turning people out. You can't go to get a bagel on a beach drive without having a vote no or being accosted with another piece of campaign literature. So I do think that people are passionate about these issues, but whether it really boosts turnout or whether it just makes the people who are going to turn out to begin with, I don't know that there's any candidate that's absolutely firing people up and leaving them feeling like.
I don't think any candidate is doing that. Excuse me, but I don't think any candidate is doing that. I agree. But I think the lens issue does fire people up. And even though it's probably overrated in terms of how big it is for the mayoral race, it's really interesting to have this other big issue on the ballot, sharing with the primary race. I would say the primary race is almost being overshadowed. And I see it basically as a battle between Rick Kreisman and Kathleen Ford to get in the primary. I think Foster's definitely going to get there. And he's been playing it pretty smooth in these debates of late, feeling very confident. And, Ford kind of surged early, but Kreisman's trying to come on now.
Mitch, my reading of it is that most voters in St. Pete, despite what Nadine said, don't want to see the pier torn down. They want some way. They haven't bonded with the lens, at least right now. Is that the way you see it?
I think there's a surge of the supporters for the lens are coming on, but they may be coming on too late. There's a group called Build a Pier of young professionals that got organized about a month ago. They realized that, in fact, this thing was going to lose. And they said, whoa, there's a lot of misinformation out there. We need to get out there. They've been canvassing out there and trying to get it going. I think this is going to be closer than people imagine, but I think it's the pro-lens people who are pushing at the end. And if it does lose, they're going to have a lot of recriminations about why it happened like that and why they didn't spread the information out, because they think that the Stop the Lens people have thrown out a lot of misinformation.
Okay.
And I don't know anybody who's so much for the lens, for the pier as it stands. They might not be for the lens, but I don't know anyone. My God, I've lived in Pinellas for quite a while, and I could probably count on my hands and toes how many times I've gone to the pier.
Yeah. Gone to the pier,
But I'd also think that there's a interesting coalition from the left and the right that are not in support of the lens. And I do believe it's the issues that has the massive interest, not the mayor's race in particular. So I'm not sure the turnout for the primary in August, will be that high. And I do agree that it will be Foster and one of the other candidates that'll go to the general.
Well, I guess the question is Kathleen Ford, is she rising or falling? That's the question everybody asks me.
I think falling dramatically.
Why?
Look, Kathleen has run several times, even back when I was at Career Flipping, I was covering her different runs, and she represents a sizable but not majority part of the electorate in St. Petersburg that sort of opposes, I don't want to say progress, but opposes this type of progress, opposes large projects, and they have plenty to point to as being sort of foolhardy, even maybe Tropicana Field, going back that far. Look, I think you're going to line up. Kreisman, I think, is going to make it in there. Foster obviously makes it in there, but they're not apart on the lens, and I think really the lens is the defining issue, and the public doesn't like it for a variety of reasons, for a variety of coalitions. The referendum on the lens spills over into the mayoral race. I just don't think she can harness enough people who put up with the rest of her statements.
Mitch, I want to ask you a sports question, because you're a sports guy. What impact did the Foster decision this week to say to the Rays, go ahead?
I think it took it off of him. It's been an issue that candidates can use against him, saying you have done nothing on the Rays except maybe help them leave this community. And so what he did was the obvious, though. They tried to have the city council. Charlie Gerdes had this proposal 6 months ago, and it tied at 4-4 to let the Rays, once they negotiate this with the city of St. Petersburg, to let them talk to Tampa. Because Foster, I thought, was very revealing his comments this week, because he basically put it out there, the reality, which is the Rays, unfortunately, are just not drawing people. They're second to last in attendance again, even though they're again an outstanding ball club. And so if you want to save them, at least give them the opportunity. Hey, they may still stay in Pinellas County. It may work out better for them there, but the Rays, Stuart Sternberg wants to talk to Tampa.
And so therefore, does Foster look more reasonable to the voters in St. Petersburg?
I think this is a good move by him.
Okay. Well, Governor Rick Scott this week appointed Republican State Representative Mike Fasano to the position of Pasco County Tax Collector following the death of Mike Olson. The appointment of Fasano to the post means that the Florida legislature will lose a consumer champion who criticized fellow Republicans on their handling of issues such as prison privatization, utility regulation, and property insurance. Fasano had spent nearly 20 years as a legislator and served in both the state Senate and the state House. Mitch, who wins when Mike Fasano now takes over Mike Olson's position as tax collector in Pasco County?
Tallahassee, the power structure there. The Pasco County residents will really lose out. Mike Fasano, he really evolved, over his career. I remember 2 years ago when you had the 2011, the Tea Party contingent came in Tallahassee, and he, along with some other moderates, Jack Vatvala and Paula Dockery, really kind of tried to put a hold and stop some legislation that a lot of people were concerned about. He kind of lost some juice the last year. He went back to the House. He was trim limited out in the Senate. And he really can't do that much. He was the one Republican fighting with the Democrats against Medicaid expansion, trying to get Medicaid expansion going. Right, and of course it went nowhere. I'll never forget 2 years ago, and there was a hearing in Tampa regarding sinkhole issue with citizens and about how he was trying to preserve that because it really hits the Pasco County taxpayers hard. And he got a standing ovation when he went out and spoke. And you really don't see that with a lot of Tallahassee lawmakers.
Okay. Well, before we go, we ask our panel members to tell us about one more major news story from the past week. Nadine, your other big story.
My other big story is the Russia and the Olympics, the growing anti-gay violence that's happening in Russia, which won't be on people's radar screens for a while. But I mean, the president's heading to Russia. The Olympic Games. There's increasing pressure on the sponsors, increasing pressure to move the Olympics, and it's really going to call the question for a lot of people.
These are the Winter Olympics next year. Should the U.S. boycott those Olympics?
Well, I think that they're more than a call for a boycott. There's a call for them to be moved elsewhere.
Okay. And
for this to be an opportunity for universal condemnation of basically anti-gay pogroms in Russia.
All right. And Mitch, your other big story.
Yeah, this is the summer of surveillance. NSA surveillance has been so huge this year. President Obama addressed it today at his press conference. Dennis Ross, congressman out in Polk County, has what he calls the Relevancy Act, which would permanently limit the powers of the NSA. He wrote a letter to House Speaker John Boehner saying he wants to bring this back up when the House comes back from recess in September. Interestingly, Kathy Castor voted against this amendment last week or 2 weeks ago that would have reduced NSA funding. I talked to her this week. She was very critical of Edward Snowden, actually, and interesting how some of the people are aligning on this issue.
Yeah, strange bedfellows. Wayne, your other big story.
My big story is CNN's medical doctor, Sanjay Gupta, has come out and actually not only supported medical marijuana or supported the end of a prohibition on marijuana, but apologized for his previous stance, which is a pretty strong statement coming from a guy who was nearly Surgeon General of the United States of America, and another step down that road as Florida heads toward a possible vote on medical marijuana being pushed by John Morgan.
Yeah. All right. And Sharon, your other big story.
Well, I'll just keep it local here. And last evening, this Tampa City Council voted their first approval on the tower, the 36-story tower that they're planning to build along the Riverwalk. So we'll be watching that closely. And
is that a good deal for the citizens of the city of Tampa?
I think it's interesting because it does change that part of the Riverwalk right there, and they actually have to create that acre. It kind of takes a little bit a different view of what the Riverwalk was, the vision of it was originally intended for, it puts, it does have the stack and pack 'em because it'll put 500 people there with some retail down on the bottom, so we'll see.
All right, well, Sharon, thanks a lot. Wayne, thank you. Mitch, thank you. And Nadine, thank you. And thank you for watching Florida This Week. It's fundraising time here at WEDU. The station relies on viewer contributions for much of